Hello, welcome to the Raw Podcast. James and Phil here. Unfortunately, I'm in Grangetown, but Phil is in Spain. How has it been so far?
Oh, very nice, but I'd rather be in Grangetown, of course.
Oh yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. What's the weather like out there?
Warm, warm,
Yeah, you don't
to
strike
say the
me as
least.
a bloke that deals with the heat well, Phil.
I deal with it all right. I don't burn too easily or anything like that, but I'm definitely comfortable. The further north I can get, generally, the happier I am. But yeah, no, I'll be okay. Don't you worry about that. I'll be all right.
No, I'm not worried about you in Spain. Don't. Right, let's start. So we'll start actually with we'll move on to sort of the upcoming preseason games, team news, all of that sort of stuff shortly. But we'll tackle straight out the bat the story about Dan Ballard, Phil, which was big news. Dan Ballard didn't travel to Spain despite being named in the preseason squad. That's because he sustained a knee injury, came off at halftime against South Shields. Ben Crompton came on, and to be fair, at the time, I didn't pick up that he had a knock, and I don't think too many other people did either. But he went to London to see a specialist, and he's ended up having minor surgery, Phil. So, what's the latest on that? When does Sunderland expect him to be back? And stating the obvious, it's an early blow for new head coach Regis Libri.
Yeah, I think one of the best things for Lebrice in the early weeks of the season, that generally speaking, the injury picture was pretty good, wasn't it? You know, the likes of Neil and Rusin and Clark, it all come back from their issues really well. Sirkin, Elise, all these kind of players. So it's definitely like the first setback. Um, I think the club have been quite careful to say it's not definitely 6 weeks. It's up to 6 weeks. I don't think it's a huge injury, and it kind of depends on how it progresses. And it might be one where we see him back a little bit quicker. I think what we can say with this large degree of certainty is that he's not going to play in any of the pre-season fixtures. Now, that obviously means he's going to be really short of match fitness because he's not going to have that kind of building block in place when he's fit again. So I think it's difficult, almost impossible, to see him make the start of the championship season. I think even the couple of games after that look as if it's going to be really difficult. So I feel as if my gut tells me that it might well be the first international break, which I think is usually in early September, isn't it? When we will sort of see him after that fully fit and able to compete. So it's no big drama, in terms of I think he'll play the majority of the season. It doesn't sound like the kind of injury where there's a lot of long-term worry or threat of major recurrence or anything like that. So it's not a major drama, but it just makes things a bit interesting going forward for the next few weeks, because with Jensen Seal, who I guess would be your kind of first in line to come in, still out for a few months, it obviously means there's a sort of position there, and there's opportunities there, and there's a bit of a dilemma for Lebrice. You've got Leo Yelde, who we've mostly seen at left back, who I think wants to play at centre half. That's his preferred position, so he's got a chance now. Joe Anderson obviously might hope that he can stick his hand up. Obviously, he played left back, didn't he, in the first pre-season friendly? And then you've got the option of shifting Naji Elise in field, which you were there at the games. I believe he did, didn't he, in the opening pre-season fixtures? And is that a way to maybe get Elise and Sirkin back in the same team together, which I think is potentially quite an exciting prospect?
Yeah, I'd like to see Agilisi at centre back actually. The news, Phil, broke because I think Dan Ballard was spotted at a train station and a grainy photo sent Sunderland Twitter into meltdown. We weren't aware of the injury at that point, so a lot of people were speculating that it could be transfer related because news had dropped that Dan Ballard was the subject of interest from that man Will Stills. He still keeps popping up across Sunderland summer. RC Lan were reportedly interested. That injury probably ends that transfer interest for the moment, you would think, Phil, although not indefinitely. It could resurface, I guess, towards the back end of the summer, start of the season. But worth noting as well that that interest hadn't actually materialised into any bids yet.
Yeah, I think realistically, like the kind of money that it would take you to get Dan Ballard at this point in time, it wouldn't really make sense not to do the deal because he's going to be out for 6 weeks. Because if you're willing to spend that much money on him, then it would make sense. You're going to be giving him a long contract, and so you would do it anyway. But I think that ultimately, yeah, as you mentioned there's a couple of things to sort of mark here. One is that Sunderland's position is really strong. As with loads of players, Ballard's under contract for a long time. There's absolutely no desire to sell them this summer, and it would take, I would go as far as to say, pretty daft money to tempt them to do so. And the other thing, as you mentioned, is there may well be interest. I'm sure there's interest from a lot of clubs, but at this stage, certainly when the news kind of broke, neither the club nor kind of those close to Ballard, I think everyone was taken a little bit off guard by it, because there's certainly been nothing formal or anything sort of significant yet. Doesn't mean that won't change, doesn't mean the interest won't firm up, doesn't mean there won't be bids in the future, but we're certainly not talking about a live deal that's kind of been put on hold because of an injury. That's not the case. There's probably interest in Ballard from a lot of clubs, but at the moment, Sunderland have not had any formal expressions of interest, and so I don't see anything happening anytime soon. And like I say, Ballard is one of those players who is inked in to be a regular starter, a massive part of the team next year. Really someone who they're investing in terms of his leadership skills because of the championship experience he now has. Obviously the international experience he's got as well. I think he's one of those who, I wouldn't say untouchable, because no one's untouchable in football and everyone has their price. But I think, dear me, you would have to really cough up to get Dan Ballard this summer, particularly because those players behind him, who Sunderland hope in time could develop to sort of be a contender, aren't quite there yet. Sealed because he's injured. Trialist has obviously got a knock at the moment, and also I think probably is still adjusting. So yeah, it's just, you can never say never, but it's just not what I see happening this summer. But that's certainly not to say there isn't interest from a lot of clubs, because I think it's pretty obvious that a player of his experience and calibre at this stage will have interest.
What do you think the ballpark fee would be for a player like Ballard, Phil?
That's a nightmare question. I
find it really interesting though, because obviously we watch him week in, week out. We've watched him progress, so we value him. We know his contract length, we know his pedigree, but sometimes we can overvalue our own players, can't we? And a fan base can overvalue their own players. And I guess I'm being biased here to a degree, but I genuinely think he's like 20, 25 million. I could only see him getting better. The only slight worry I would have about him is he has had a couple of injuries during his time at Sunderland, not last season, but his first season he broke his foot, which could happen to anybody, and then there was a few others, wasn't there? So with that knee injury as well, that's the only little question mark. But in terms of his pedigree, the way he plays football, I think he's probably one of the best centre-backs of the league at the moment. I think he's worth that sort of 20, 25 million ballpark figure.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. That's pretty much where I would land it. I think sometimes there is a temptation to be like, he's our player, he's really good, and therefore he's worth like 250 million. And I definitely do that as well. I'm like, oh my God, Dan Neil, like 90 million and we can talk kind of thing. But like, although it's a joke, there's a kind of serious point to that, because these guys are important to the team and they are under a long-term contract. So, it's not like you do have to overpay, if you like. Their valuation will be significant to reflect both their importance to the team, their future potential, and their contract. So although we're kind of joking, it is relevant, because it's not like, inverted commas, not every deal has to be a fair one. It's got to suit the party who the player's contracted to. So I definitely think, if I'm just looking through now the list of sort of like championship records, and I'm looking at the main defenders that have gone. Nathan Ake went when Bournemouth were relegated, obviously, to Man City for 45 million. The next one down that and see is Ben Godfrey, went for about 25 million to Everton. And I think that's probably what you're looking at. And that's maybe overestimating a little bit, because, as I say, we love him and he's a Sunderland player. So maybe we'll say between 20 and 25 million would probably maybe be about right. As you say, do I see someone paying that this summer? My gut tells me probably not. If he has another sort of gun season and plays 40 games after his injury and kicks on again, then we might be having a different conversation. Listen, absolutely no way would Sunderland sell under 15 million, in my opinion. No. Absolutely no way. And like I say, I think it would take towards 20, maybe inching towards 25.
And you do have to.
And I'd imagine Arsenal will have a sell on one day as well. So you have to, with a lot of these players, you have to adjust it slightly as well. Ultimately, that's the reason you get them, because otherwise clubs would just hold on to them unless they knew that they were protected against them flourishing as Ballard and Jack Clark have done. Yeah, exactly. They just wouldn't let them go. They just wouldn't let them go for a fee that Sunderland or Championship clubs can afford. So that's just kind of like the harsh reality, I guess. But yeah, don't see him going for a penny under 15, given his contractual situation. I'd be staggered right now. I think if you want to do the deal right now, I think you would have to start at 20. But that is all hypothetical.
It is all hypothetical, and it is all opinion.
But it's good fun. It's good fun. So that's fine.
It is. Transfers make the world go round, as we know. That sort of Ballard story started a bit of a flurry of transfer links, didn't it, Phil? You wrote actually that it felt like the last day of the summer window last year where you had that interest in Roberts, Neil, there was interest in Clark as well. Stewart ended up going. It felt like that over the past couple of days because you had the links with Ekwah, with Hume as well, and it just feels like it's all gathering pace a little bit, and it's a little bit of a reminder actually that Sunderland have some really, really talented Championship players at a good age who could progress, who could go further up the ladder, and it does throw sort of last season's 16th place Championship disappointment into stark light, doesn't it?
It does in a way, yeah. It kind of seems wild, doesn't it? But it probably tells you maybe we can try and take the positive angle, which is most clubs feel that was a bit of an aberration, really, rather than the level of those players. So maybe we can take some enthusiasm and confidence from that. That's very much a glass half full view, but I usually go the other way. So let's go glass half full for a change. But yeah, I think I think it did. Obviously, it's to nowhere near the same extent as the end of the last summer window, because obviously, I think for a few reasons there was a lot more sort of concrete interest. We were talking about actual bids coming in, and obviously Stewart did go. But I kind of made that point just because I do think it's reflective of the fact that actually you can say what you like about the project, the model or whatever. Like there's loads of fair things you can say. It's really frustrating when they won't sort of be flexible for a striker. Maybe they haven't signed enough Championship experience. All these kind of things. The one thing you would have to say is that consistently they've held on to talent. Like we've got the point now where we've got enough windows, enough evidence to say like there is absolutely no goal here to just sell players for profit at the first opportunity.
Yeah,
if the project was, if the project was as soon as we can flip them to make money, they're gone. Joe would already have gone. Jack Clark would have gone last summer. Ekwah would have gone last summer. Yeah, exactly. So I do think like if there's one thing where maybe I think it's fair to say there should be, or an element of trust has been earned. That's probably the best way to put it. I do actually think it's in terms of selling players. We know that they'll do it eventually in the right circumstances. So Stewart being in the last year of his deal with those injury issues, Southampton putting forward what I think pretty much everyone agreed was a pretty fair price for the situation. I do think that's one thing that people can sort of keep in mind when these links happen and when these stories emerge. They're legitimate in terms of obviously there's loads of interest in these players. And I think at the moment what you're also seeing as well is I definitely think top European leagues are starting to see the Championship as a place to sign players and get good value, which would never have been the case 10 years ago. And I do wonder if Gaio Corres, who obviously went to Sporting Lisbon and absolutely smashed it, I do wonder if there's a lot of European clubs going, hang on, like they could make an absolute fortune on him here, and he's gone straight up to that top level. And I wonder if a few clubs are looking at it thinking, right, who's the next guy? Like, who else is playing in this league who's clearly good enough? So I do think it's like something that'll run and run. I think we'll talk about it loads. We'll do loads of stories on it. But like, I do think the core of the team for the season is locked in. And I just don't see 3 or 4 of them going in this window. I just can't see it. I'd be stunned, and we'll have to do a different podcast on what's happened if that's the case.
Incomings as well, Phil, quickly. Not really much to write home about. Sunderland apparently made a late play for Sinclair Armstrong from QPR, but he's ended up going to Bristol City, I believe. There's also been the links to Mendy, League Two striker from Caen. Do we know anything about that, Phil, other than that Sunderland are looking to add something in that area that they don't already have?
Yeah, I think we can see, as we've said like a couple of times, I think there's a little bit, I don't want to say change in strategy because that's too dramatic. I think we're seeing a little bit of flexibility, right, in terms of what they're looking to do. And I think if we look at the key for more interest in January in a loan deal, obviously Moore's now gone to Sheffield United, hasn't he? I don't think Sunderland were ever going to be in a permanent deal at that level of fee and wages. But what we can certainly see is that there's probably an acceptance now that a senior striker is something that's needed, and that even if maybe it's not the normal way that they operate in the transfer market, someone needs to come in who can give those strikers the room to breathe. See, I'm not sure who it will be. Mendy, it seems, has a pretty lucrative offer from Saudi Arabia at this stage in his career. Is that something that he'll want to pursue? I imagine that could be significant for him. So we'll have to wait and see whether anything materialises from that. But what we're certainly seeing is like a genuine acceptance or desire to add a little bit of experience in the front end of the pitch that will hopefully help the likes of Meander and Hamir give them a bit of time and space to grow without the sort of intense scrutiny of having to be Sunderland's number 9.
Absolutely. Alan Browne, Phil, we'll move on to him. You've had a little chat with him today. The first bit of that is up on the Sunderland Echo website, and I believe there's a second bit coming as well for tea time. First impressions?
Really good talker. I think you can see straight away why he's had such a good career at Championship level. See straight away why Sunderland saw him as someone who's going to add a lot to the dressing room. Really calm, been there and done it. I can, don't think he's going to have any problem sort of speaking up if he feels there's something not right or something needs to be said. At the same time, like we spoke a bit about that, and he was really good on it in terms of saying you've got to be careful though, because it's something that's been mentioned a lot. But I need to earn the respect of these players. It's no good me coming in on day one and trying to run the dressing room. I have to show them that I deserve to be in this team, and I have to show them that I've got something to say. So, yeah, I'm happy to speak up. Yeah, I want to be a leader. It comes naturally to me. I'm happy to do it, but I'm not just going to walk in on day one and start telling people, what the crack is, because, I have to earn their respect. I have to, if I'm going to be a leader, I need to be in the team. So, yeah, really interested in all that kind of stuff. And also said that he hopes to feature at some point in the 2 games this weekend. So that's something for fans to look forward to. I think because obviously he missed the first week of pre-season, I think he's slightly behind most of the players. But it sounds like he's been doing a lot of training out here in the heat this week. So I feel like we'll see him get some minutes this weekend, and then hopefully, looking towards that Blackpool and Bradford game, he can really get some minutes and then hopefully be ready for the start of the season.
I really enjoyed the quote towards the back end of your first piece. I think it said something like, I'll play as a 6, I'll play as an 8, and I'll play as a 10, but I'll also play anywhere, and I've played everywhere for Preston apart from in goal. And my initial thoughts were, you'll fit right in here, because that versatility is definitely something Sunderland look for.
Yeah, I did wonder whether I should mention the 950 Sunderland central midfielders who've been converted to right back.
We should come on a podcast and just sit and name midfielders that have played full back for Sunderland.
Yeah, we will do a special podcast so people will get your converted central midfielders in. We'll rank Sunderland's converted central midfielders to full back. That's what we'll do.
I think about 10 off the top of my head already.
Yeah, listeners, get your suggestions in. But I think, on a serious note, it's definitely something Browne had spoken about in his conversations with the club. Obviously, he'll play anywhere, and if there's millions of injuries, then he'll help out. Of course, he will. But I don't think he was left in any doubt that the club was signing him to play in midfield. I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it. I think he was left in no doubt that someone felt he will add something different to the midfield, and that's why they want to sign him. And he did say, probably best as an 8, sort of box to box, but I do like playing holding midfield, which I think will be music to the ears of Sunderland fans. Because while I think they'll listen, we can argue about it loads and debate it, and God knows I've been frustrated with the times. Normally, Sunderland don't play with a holding midfielder. They want to play with 3 midfielders who will impact the final third. There will be some games where it demands it, because of the level of opposition and what have you. And we saw Sunderland fall short this year. So it's nice to know that there is someone in the squad who's got that kind of tool to his bow, if you like. So tool to his bow? String to his bow. Tool to his armoury. Tool to his armoury, that's the one.
String to his toolbox.
Yeah. Dear me. Goodness.
Just on that, how do you view that midfield at Sunderland at the moment? Because me and Joe touched on this very briefly the other day, but there's a lot of players now back fit for pre-season that can play 10, 8 and 6 and a variation of thereof, but you don't feel like Sunderland are really fully stocked in midfield yet, I don't think.
Yeah.
And a caveat to that would be that a couple will probably leave as well, but there's a lot of bodies there, but not necessarily the right balance, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I suppose the big thing is Rig, really. Is he moving into midfield, and we know he's going to get a lot of minutes because that's why he's still here and he's not at Man United or Bayern Munich or anywhere like that. And so if he's one of your 3 regularly, then actually you've got Rig, Aushish, Embleton, Matete, Ekwah, Neil, and now Browne. You are quite well stocked. It's just as you say, you feel as if there's too many of the same type of player. That's kind of the issue. That's why I like Browne so much as a signing, because he is different. He may have the attacking instincts like Neil and Ekwah and Matete and Aushish and Rig do, but but I feel like he's probably got a bit more steel as well, and his game's probably a bit more about his athleticism as well. So I think that's a really nice addition. Like, would I like them to just sign this dude like Claude Makalele who just sits in front of the back four and just like they shall not pass? I would love them to do that. I just don't think it's going to happen. I feel as if the view from Sunderland is because they don't usually play with that kind of player in their team, that it's not, it doesn't make sense to commit a huge amount of wages to it or what have you. And maybe Browne's kind of like the player who can be an attacking midfielder, or in certain games, when you go away to Leeds United or whatever, you can ask him to be a bit more disciplined, maybe.
Yeah, shall we talk about the Trialist goalkeeper, Phil? He obviously started against South Shields last week, and I'm calling him Blondie, by the way. Me enjoyed this conversation, but I can't pronounce his second name, and I'm not going to try. So if you want to have a crack at that, be my guest. But he's actually travelled out to Spain, hasn't he, Phil? What is the latest?
Yeah, so he wasn't named in the original sort of training group. We've got Anthony Patterson, obviously Simon Moore, who's another one who I think will make his debut this weekend because he's been in full training, which is good to see. And Kelechi Chibueze, who is sort of the third official goalkeeper. Adam Richardson's out with the under-21s. They're obviously out in Italy at the moment, so they needed sort of their goalkeeping stock as well. But yeah, Blondie is out here, and I think, listen, anything can sort of happen quickly, but I think that's a fairly good indication that he probably is looking to sign, and the club are looking to sign him. I think the idea being that then allows them a lot of latitude to let their young goalkeepers go out on loan over the course of the season and play regularly, which is something that we've talked about. Matty Young, I think, is very, very close now to going out on loan to the AFL. That's why he's not here in Spain. So I think that maybe once that's confirmed, or if that definitely goes through, we might see a bit of progress on this one. Obviously, the player himself has a decision to make in terms of, do I want to come where I might not get loads of minutes, but where the facilities are amazing and my development and my coaching is potentially going to be exceptional? Or is it time to sort of go further down the pyramid where you might not get all that to the same extent, but you play more regularly? So we'll wait and see what happens with that one. But as you mentioned there, he is definitely here. And I think that should be that's probably a little bit of an indication that if all progresses with Young, maybe we'll see some movement on that one.
Yeah, so the first of the two pre-season games in Spain comes tomorrow against Nottingham Forest. Very hard to sort of second guess Regis Debris, but is it possible, Phil, that we might see a different shape? I know he went with 4-2-3-1 over both games at the weekend. Perhaps a little experiment coming up. Not really sure, but maybe a mix of personnel as well, leaning towards perhaps his first sort of strongest 11. An idea of that may come against Nottingham Forest, you would think?
Yeah, you would think the Nottingham side is going to be slightly stronger just because of the sheer... because at the level of quality, I think that commands a certain, to get something out of the game, you need to be strong enough, and your players need to sort of be fit enough to compete.
500 million in the past.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I think that will command like a certain level of player. But obviously fitness will be a factor as well. There may be some guys who he thinks, Browne's an example where he thinks that guy could definitely be in my team on the first day of the season, but at the moment, this game and the potential intensity and quality you might not quite be there for yet. So I do wonder if that might be something to consider as well as maybe being a little bit of a factor. But what was I going to say? What was your question? Oh, shape. Yeah, I don't know. I expect to see him experiment a bit over the course of the pre-season campaign, but he was pretty clear in his first press conference, wasn't he, that I like to, attacking a 4-3-3, defending a 4-4-2. And he did kind of say, we need to start with that, and we need to give it enough time to identify the problems. And then once we've done that, then we can start and make the tweaks. So I wonder if for these two games this weekend, his view will be to keep things fairly similar, give the players a similar kind of exposure, split the squads a little bit again. And then at that point, he's got kind of 4 games where he can actually step back and look at it, review the footage, see where he thinks he's short, see where he thinks he's looking really strong. And then maybe you've got, because there's then the Blackpool and the Bradford games, isn't there, within a few days. Maybe that Bradford game sticks out to me as one where you can maybe do a little bit more experimentation and look at some other options. Mm-hmm. And then that leaves you the Blackpool Saturday game. And obviously we now have the Marseille Saturday game. Obviously your Marseille one is like dress rehearsal, isn't it? So I think I'd probably see that Bradford game in a couple of weeks maybe as one where there might be a bit more scope for experimentation. I've got no idea. But just from his comments, I'd be surprised if he changed the shape tomorrow because it feels like he wants to establish some consistency.
Just on to that Marseille game, Phil, that was announced last night. Actually, or was it the night before? I can't remember. It all blurs into one, but that was announced recently in honour of Kiri Louis-Dreyfus's father, Robert Louis-Dreyfus, who obviously used to own Marseille, not taking place at the Stadium of Light because the work, which was announced earlier in the summer, is still ongoing. However, I feel like this is going to be a real deep cut of Sunderland game in 10 years' time. It's like, yeah, do you remember that time we played Marseille at Valley Parade, having played at Valley Parade like 4 days earlier? It's going to be one of those, I think.
Yeah, it's like, to be fair, like I was really positive about it when it was announced in terms of, I think it's obviously really nice for Kirill. Like, it's obviously really significant 15th anniversary this year of the death of his father, Robert, who, beloved at Marseille, and that's like a really nice thing. It's also fantastic opposition the week before the start of the season, to play Roberto De Zerbi's Marseille. I think that's a fantastic dress rehearsal. And I think last summer, Sunderland, in my view, didn't play the calibre of opposition that they needed to until right at the very end, when they played Mallorca. This feels like we've got a much better range this time around. And I think that Marseille game is a really good way to round it off. It is bizarre going to Valley Parade like twice in 5 days.
We may as well stay down there for a bit, Phil. We'll have a holiday in Bradford.
Do you know the one thing I will say is that's actually a pretty good ground, like for a League Two club. Facilities decent, fantastic. I think it's a decent place to go for fans. So it's not ideal. It's absolutely not ideal, but I
have tried to get it as close to the northeast as they can. I think logistically, obviously, people will turn around and say, "Well, it's not actually that close to the northeast. There's this stadium, there's that stadium." But a lot of these stadiums are in use that weekend because every other club in the country is trying to do the same thing and trying to get their pre-season preparations in.
Any fan who's not going to be able to get that game because it's not in the northeast, like, that's a nightmare, and I totally sympathise with, because it'll be a really good one to watch, and we're unbelievably fortunate that we'll be able to go in a work capacity because it'll be a good game to see. But I do think like it's the right level of opponent for that time, and I can understand understanding why it's not at the stadium, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of like the pitch getting that extra rest and stuff when the stuff kicks off for real.
Absolutely. Anything else you'd like to talk about, Phil, before we end the podcast?
Do you know what? I feel like we should go out on a high. I think this has been a good chat. Should we talk about Ekwah, actually? We should maybe talk a little bit about Ekwah. Because obviously that's been...
didn't mention, did we? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Ekwah one I thought we should mention because that's one where like there actually has been a proposal. I think that's been a formal expression of interest from Udinese, obviously in Serie A. I think just quickly to say that from my understanding, like there definitely has been interest, there has been a proposal, but I think it's the initial one is a long way short of what would make Sunderland consider selling. And I think the view is like, if that's the opening bid, we're so far apart that it's difficult to see them getting up to our valuation because there's so much, such a big gap. So I'm not anticipating that one to happen at the moment, but it is obviously very, very, very early days. I think the thing about Ekwah is he's shown what a good player he can be. And last year was his first full season professional football. If you think about it, like last year, Daniel was amazing. That was basically his third season. And that was the point in which he reached a consistent level every single week. So I do think Sunderland know that it would be reckless to get rid of him now just because, he didn't always hit his top level last season. So I still think they have a pretty big valuation for Ekwah. And from what I hear, that's not in danger of being tested just yet. But obviously, middle of July. There's a long way to go.
No, it is. It is the middle of July. That was a question I was going to sort of throw out there. And I'm a big Ekwah fan, dating back to his debut against Burnley, actually. But is the idea of Pierre Ekwah as a player at the moment probably greater than the reality in terms of his performances last season, which did dip? But you must say Sunderland's performances did dip as well. There was mitigation, three managers, and obviously, as you mentioned, Ekwah's first season as well. There is clearly potential there, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and I'd go slightly the other way, actually, and say that the issues he faced at times last season, I think, have maybe pushed it the other way, where we can forget a little bit how good he's shown he can be at times.
Yeah,
and I think that's something that I would sort of put his mitigation in.
I mean, that
think the main
Southampton
thing
game
for
is
Ekwah,
the blueprint, isn't it, for Ekwah? That Southampton game at the
yeah.
Stadium, like where he was
And
brilliant.
he did have that nasty leg injury, and I know there was a lot of like, oh, it's a dead leg. How's it taken so much of it? But exactly the same thing happened with Jack Grealish. Jack Grealish had a dead leg, and it was like, oh, it's not very serious. But it took him a long time to get his rhythm back, so yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not. I don't think you could sit here and say that at the moment Ekwah's like indispensable in the way that Trey Hume is, that Dan Neil is, that Jack Clark is. But I do think we shouldn't rush to make a decision based on what happened last season, because I think you have to remember that it was his first full season of professional football. And like, I think until you've played 50, 60 games, I think you're going to be inconsistent. So big year for him. And I think the main thing is, what's he going to be? I think that's a big question with Ekwah. Is he going to be an attacking midfielder? Is he going to be box to box? Is he going to be a holding midfielder? In which case, I don't think it's unfair to say he's got a huge amount of development to do on the defensive side of his game. So we will see with that one. I think that's going to be one of the really interesting sort of themes of this season.
And Trey Hume as well, Phil, just a quick one on him. Obviously, reports about interest from Galatasaray and whatnot. Unsurprising, really, that clubs are being mentioned with Trey Hume, because his numbers, just his sheer numbers, I haven't got them in front of me, but if you look them up compared to the rest of the Championship fullbacks, they are brilliant. He often tops the charts in a number of areas. Tackling, his tackling is brilliant. If ever a player was made for Sunderland in terms of his tackling, it was Trey Hume, because he has sort of single-handedly restored my faith in the slide tackle, and it can be achieved cleanly in the Championship without giving away a foul. He's magnificent at it.
Yeah, and that's probably where a lot of the value comes from, because we don't see defenders like that coming through anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that'll change as time starts to go on, because as wingers become more and more important, people like Jack Clark, defenders who actually can stop them, and a good 1v1 are going to become more valuable, can't they? And again, going back to that Guy Corres thing, like, that's why I think I'm not surprised you're seeing big European clubs mentioned with these, linked with these Championship players, because I think they're starting to see it as potentially a market where they can find a gem. But again, Hume, different to Ekwah, my understanding is there's been no formal contact yet from anyone. So whether that changes moving forward or in the near future, we wait and see. But that's not one I'm losing any sleep over at the moment. Hume, I think, has got 3 years left. So
yeah.
Pay a huge fee, or it's not happening.
Yeah, it's the same, a similar situation to sort of Ballard as well, isn't it, and Jack Clark, in that, and Ekwah as well, in that Sunderland are protected in a sense that they've all got contracts that have a while to run, so that bumps the price up. The flip side to that is that money from sales will be owed to former clubs, so that way of doing things for Sunderland has definitely benefited them, you would say.
Yeah. Sorry, can you just repeat that? I just got an email that I was reading. I got distracted.
It wasn't a very good point anyway. No, but what I'm saying in terms of the players that are attracting interest, they've all got long contracts, but a lot of them as well, money from potential sales will be owed to their former clubs. So West Ham, Midfield, Tottenham, that's how you end up getting those players at the end of the day, as we touched on.
Yeah, it is. Especially Hume, I suppose, is slightly different because he's not coming from one of the big sort of Premier League academies. But yeah, definitely with all of those players, like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, it's daft having a sell on, but the reality is that's how you're able to sign them permanently. Otherwise, the Premier League club would just keep loaning them to you. And we've seen it with Philogene, haven't we? Jaden Philogene, who had a brilliant season for Hull, and you're looking at it going, wow, how have Hull managed to get him? And that's because, obviously Aston Villa have been able to get him back fairly easily.
Yeah.
So I think that's just the reality of the modern game, if you like, and the financial strength that the Premier League clubs have, and the way that they can dictate the terms of the deal. It's why growing your own is such an absolutely massive thing if you can do it consistently in the modern game. And that's where the likes of Rig, Neil, hopefully Tommy Watson, all these kind of young players, Matty Young, Patterson, that's where these guys could change everything for Sunderland, because, that will be like, either they'll develop into the players that we know we can produce from Sunderland's academy, top level players who take Sunderland to the Premier League, or they're basically, like, to use a horrible accounting term, like pure profit. Who will be an absolute game changer for you if you do have to sell them. So yeah, the point I would make on that is it really goes to show that if you can fund and develop a top academy, that in over a 5-10 year period, that could be an absolute game changer for you if you're trying to get out of the Championship. But that is probably a subject for another podcast, I think, James.
Yeah, absolutely. What I will add, though, Phil, and it's something we've talked about on recent podcasts as well. You mentioned the Hull City example. Leeds United's another one. In the Championship, you've seen a lot of turnover, a lot of big money deals, a lot of players being sold. Sunderland are in a good position in terms of they don't have to sell anybody really this summer, do they? In terms of financial fair play, they've still got a lot of wiggle room. The club's obviously making a loss, but that's been funded by Kirill Dreyfus, and it's nowhere near the losses of most clubs in the Championship. So in terms of that, I could understand maybe why fans would look at it and go, because I've done it before many a deadline day when I've got, oh my God, all of these teams have been linked with our players and they're all going to go. But it's just not at that point, is it?
No, and I think like the club would say like that's exactly why they're really careful in terms of not just spending huge amounts of money on players with no resale value, because then you get in a situation where you may have to sell 3 or 4 players at once to meet your financial fair play, and that's obviously really destabilizing for the team and can send you backwards. So I think a key part of their strategy is like if we're careful in terms of how we do our recruitment, we will never be in a position where we have to lose 4 or 5 of these brilliant young players, potentially for less than their worth, because other teams know we need to do business, and all at once. The idea is that you can then have steady progression. It's a bit of a weird one at Sunderland because they went from 6th to 16th. And we understand the reason why that happened. It was because they made a series of really impulsive and really bad decisions off the pitch. Let's hope that doesn't happen this year and we can have a bit of stability and that team can get back to where it was and reap the benefits, really, because I do think there'll be some new additions, obviously, and hopefully some quality added in key areas of the pitch up front, etc. But I do think the core of the team is in place, and hopefully that'll be really valuable this season. It'll give someone a real edge that they have that stability.
Yeah, a little statistic for you. This was shared by Roker Report, actually, from Experimental 361. Sunderland, in terms of their playing squad, the players that remain at Sunderland now played 92% of the minutes last season, so there hasn't been much squad churn at Sunderland at all. Hull City, for instance, who went big in January, just 47.7% of the minutes played last season were by players still at the club. So that just goes to show, doesn't it, Phil, how the Championship's a bit bananas, really, in places.
Yeah.
And stability can be a good thing. You don't know what the fortunes of Sunderland and Hull are going to be, but my gut instinct would be that sort of having a lot less churn would be beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's really, really, really rare to see a team have a huge turnover and hit the ground running from day one. Mm-hmm. And we saw it last summer. We saw it
in League One. I mean, Christ.
Yeah. And we saw it with Stoke last summer. They did loads of business under Alex Neil and they did it early. And they found it really difficult to get results straight away because the players were acclimatized. Now, a lot of those players, I think, towards the end of the season, were starting to look really talented. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's why we signed them. But I think like there obviously will be exceptions that people could point to, but it's rare, I think, for teams that have a huge amount of turnover to suddenly hit the ground running and click. So hopefully that's to someone's benefit. But as we said, should have been to their benefit last year, and it wasn't because of other things. So
well, you could argue that it started to the benefit. You could argue that it started to the benefit.
No, I agree. Absolutely right. Yeah. No, so fingers crossed.
Anyway, what have we got coming, Phil, on the Sunderland website? What are you doing over in Spain apart from drinking bottles of Spanish lager and having a good time?
I've barely had a drink yet, so I resent that allegation. I've been hard at work for the good readers of the Sunderland Echo, and some annoying person keeps badgering me for podcasts and videos. So that's taking up plenty of my time.
Imagine the annoying person badgering me for podcasts and videos.
Oh, poor Rich. I hope he's not listening.
Hopefully he's not listening.
Yeah, so obviously you can read that little bit that I've done with Alan Browne. That's on the website now. So is the story on Blondie, the Trialist goalkeeper. That's up there now if you want to read a bit more background on that. I'm going to have team news and previews of the Forest game tonight on the website, so you can keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a gallery of all the latest training picks. And also I'm going to do a bit of a feature from my chat with Alan Browne. We're going to chat about why he chose Sunderland. He's going to talk about some other stuff, his ambitions for the season and things. I'm really hopeful that people are going to enjoy reading that because he was a great interviewee. So that's hopefully going to come out early evening. Obviously, I will post it on my Twitter and it'll be on the website. But yeah, I would definitely recommend people go and read that. Not because of the writer, because of the interviewee, because he was super good. And then tomorrow's game day. So we'll have all our usual stuff. Match report, ratings, analysis, all that stuff. I'll do it on the whistle. So keep your eyes out on my Twitter because I'll do my usual questions. That'll be on YouTube and on the website. So Yeah, there's going to be stacks of stuff. To be fair, it's exciting to have a couple of good games against good opposition to cover. Yeah, hopefully we'll have loads of stuff.
Superb. SunderlandEcho.com for all of the latest Sunderland news. We're on YouTube, Twitter, X, Google, you name it. You can find us. Thanks, Phil, for joining us. Thanks for everybody watching at home. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.